probably the most well-known mountaintop fortress in the world is Machu Picchu, in Peru. But long before that was built you had the Hebrew bastion of Masada. Masada, Hebrew for fortress, is an ancient fortification in the southern district of Israel situated on top of an isolated rock plateau, akin to a mesa. It is located on the eastern edge of the Judean desert, overlooking the Dead Sea 20 kilometers, 12 miles, east of Arad. Herod the Great built 2 palaces for himself on the mountain and fortified Masada between 37 and 31 BCE. On Masada, the plateau ends in cliffs falling about 1,300 foot to the east and about 300 foot to the west. The natural approaches to the fortress are very difficult to navigate. The top of the mesa-like plateau is flat and about 1,800 by 890 foot. Herod built a 13-foot high casemate wall around the plateau totaling 4,300 foot in length, reinforced by towers. The fortress contained storehouses, barracks, an armory, a palace, and cisterns that were refilled by rainwater. But Masada would become famous for its siege that occurred during the First Jewish-Roman War, from 73 to 74 CE in present-day Israel. The siege has become controversial, with some Jews regarding Masada as a place of reverence, commemorating ancestors who fell heroically against oppression, and others regarding it as a testament to extremism and a refusal to compromise. Masada has been described as a table mountain that is extremely isolated and appears all but impregnable. Originally, the fortress could only be reached by a single pathway that was only 1 person wide. This pathway was named the Snake for the way it twists and zigzags to the summit. Flavius Josephus, a Jew born and raised in Jerusalem, is the only historian to provide a detailed account of the First Jewish-Roman War and the only person who recorded what happened on Masada. After being captured during the siege of Yodfat and then freed by Vespasian, Josephus chronicled the Roman campaign. Josephus presumably based his narration on interviews with the Roman commanders. According to him, the long siege by the troops of the Roman Empire led to the mass suicide of the Sicarii rebels and resident Jewish families of the Masada fortress, although this is not supported by archaeological investigation. According to Josephus, Masada was first constructed by the Hasmoneans. Between 37 and 31 BCE, Herod the Great fortified it as a refuge for himself in the event of a revolt. In 66 CE, at the beginning of the First Jewish-Roman War, a group of Jewish extremists called the Sicarii overcame the Roman garrison of Masada and settled there. The Sicarii were commanded by Eleazar ben Yair, and in 70 CE they were joined by additional Sicarii and their families expelled from Jerusalem by the Jewish population with whom the Sicarii were in conflict. Shortly thereafter, following the Roman siege of Jerusalem and subsequent destruction of the Second Temple, additional members of the Sicarii and many Jewish families fled Jerusalem and settled on the mountaintop, with the Sicarii using it as a refuge and base for raiding the surrounding countryside. According to modern interpretations of Josephus, the Sicarii were an extremist splinter group of the Zealots and were equally antagonistic to both Romans and other Jewish groups. According to Josephus, on Passover, the Sicarii raided Ein Gedi, a nearby Jewish settlement, and killed 700 of its inhabitants. Archaeology indicates that the Sicarii modified some of the structures they found at Masada. These include a building that was modified to function as a synagogue, although it did not contain a mikveh or the benches found in other early synagogues. It is considered one of the oldest synagogues in Israel. In 72 CE, the Roman governor of Judea, Lucius Flavius Silva, led Roman Legion Exfratensis, a number of auxiliary units and Jewish prisoners of war, totaling some 15,000 men and women, to lay siege to the 960 people in Masada. The Roman legion surrounded Masada and built a circumvallation wall, before commencing construction of a siege ramp against the western face of the plateau, moving thousands of tons of stones and beaten earth to do so. This was an incredible engineering feat that the Roman army had become famous for. Josephus does not record any attempts by the Sicarii to counterattack the besiegers during this process, a significant difference from his accounts of other sieges of the revolt. This is probably due to the vast difference in strength and the massive cost of attempting such an attack. The ramp was completed, after probably 2 to 3 months of siege. A giant siege tower with a battering ram was constructed and moved laboriously up the completed ramp to assault the wall. This would have been another Herculean task and only possible to do the training and discipline of the Roman army. According to Josephus, when the Romans entered the fortress, they found it to be a citadel of death. The Jewish rebels had set all the buildings but the food storerooms ablaze and had killed each other, declaring a glorious death, preferable to a life of infamy. According to Josephus, the Jews hoped that all of their nation beyond the Euphrates would join together with them to raise an insurrection, but in the end there were only 960 Jewish zealots who fought the Roman army at Masada. When these zealots were trapped on top of Masada with nowhere to run, Josephus tells us that the zealots believed it was by the will of God, and by necessity, that they are to die. 2 women, who survived the suicide by hiding inside a cistern along with 5 children, repeated Eleazar ben Yair's exhortations to his followers, prior to the mass suicide, verbatim to the Romans. Since we long ago resolved never to be servants to the Romans, nor to any other than to God himself, who alone is the true and just Lord of mankind, the time has now come that obliges us to make that resolution true in practice. We were the very first that revolted, and we are the last to fight against them, and I cannot but esteem it as a favor that God has granted us, that it is still in our power to die bravely, and in a state of freedom. As Judaism prohibits suicide, Josephus reported that the defenders had drawn lots and killed each other in turn, down to the last man, who would be the only one to actually take his own life. Josephus says that Eleazar ordered his men to destroy everything except the foodstuffs to show that the defenders retained the ability to live, and so had chosen death over slavery. Despite this, archaeological evidence has shown that the storerooms were also burned, though whether this was by Romans, by Jews, by later events or natural fire is unclear. Dark Histories had the pleasure of visiting this site some time ago and can attest to its majesty. You could feel the history seeping through the walls. You could smell the battle and the fear that no doubt clung in the air. We were amazed at the bravery of the defenders but also the incredible feat of engineering that led to the ending of the siege. Truly an unbelievable sight. In conclusion, we believe that the Sicarii died fighting. They were extremists and would have fought to take as many Romans with them as they could. The Romans, on the other hand, having no doubt tired of the siege and having taken casualties, would have put each and everyone to the sword.